welcome to the July 21st edition of the TimeformUS forecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Milkowski, and we are looking ahead to a big weekend of racing in New Jersey. On Saturday at Monmouth Park, they're running their two Grade 1 races and the feature of their summer season, the Haskell, that goes as race 12 on their 14 race card. The other Grade 1 is the United Nations, going 1 3/8 for the older turf horses, but plenty of stakes throughout the day at Monmouth. Craig and I on this podcast are going to discuss the $500,000 guaranteed 50-cent late pick 4 sequence that begins in race 9, ending in the Haskell. The Wolf Hill is race 9, going through the Molly Pitcher, the United Nations, and the Haskell being the last leg of that. Craig, it's a little weird to me that Monmouth didn't card a pick 5 sequence ending in the Haskell. There is a pick 5 at the end of the day, but it incorporates 2 of the non-stakes races, so we thought this pick 4 might be a better sequence to discuss. I will say, at least at Monmouth Park, this pick 4 is just a 15% takeout wager, so at least it's not one of those high takeout pick 4s.
Yeah, I agree. It looks like a pretty good sequence. I do like that they left the Monmouth Cup out of it as well. Well, Proxy will be an overwhelming favorite, so maybe had they done an all stakes pick 5, it would have basically been a pick 4 anyway.
We'll kick things off with the Wolf Hill Stakes. This is race 9. It's going 5.5 furlongs on the turf course for 3 and up runners. Field of 10 signed on with 1 MTO entrant. You'll notice as you go through the PPs for this Wolf Hill that there are, I think, 3 runners cross-entered at Colonial on Saturday. I was just checking out our colleague Dan Illman's preview of a couple of the turf stakes at Monmouth Park on Saturday, and Dan reports that both Eamon and Whitty are looking to run at Monmouth instead of Colonial. So this field is supposed to hold together pretty much as it's drawn. I think we're still waiting to hear about where one more horse who's cross-entered will go. That would be Allegon. I'm not sure if he's running at Monmouth or not. But good news, Craig, because sometimes when horses are cross-entered, these races can get decimated if all connections decide to go in one direction or the other. I think the one thing that we're still waiting to see with regard to these turf races on Saturday at Monmouth is how much rain we get on Friday. We're recording this on Friday morning. There is some rain predicted later in the day, but it doesn't look quite as bad as the initial forecast earlier in the week.
No, that's good to hear because obviously we're going to be talking about a couple turf races in this 4-horse sequence. If this race were to be moved to dirt, there are 2 pretty dominant third horses in here, the MTO and Whitty, who you already talked about. This is a fun race, assuming it stays on turf. There's a lot of speed in this field, which is not all that surprising, but for a 5.5 furlong turf sprint. But there are plenty of front runners in here, and I think things could get really interesting on the front end.
Yeah, just glancing over the PPs in TimeformUS, we've got 4 of the 10 horses with the leader designation. Looks like the fastest of all is Nothing Better, though it's hard to look at a pace projector and not see That's Right shown in front, because that is a horse that is almost always leading in the early stages of his races. He's extremely fast, but just given the presence of those 2, along with 4 Harp and Just Jeremy, and even that cheaper claimer that's moving up Corduroy Road, it's hard to not see this pace getting really hot if it holds together as drawn.
It is, and what makes it interesting is I would say most of the contenders, but the stronger contenders, the top 2 choices on the morning line, are 2 of those horses that figure to be battling for the early lead, and that's Nothing Better and 4 Harp. The 2 horses who have the best TimeformUS speed figures in the field by quite a bit. So we're going to have to decide how much you think the pace is going to influence the results here. And it is just 5.5 furlongs, so maybe it's not quite as strong as if it was a longer distance, but 5.5 can be a little different than 5. So it's a race where I'm not going to toss out those those front running contenders, but I'm going to look at Whitty pretty strongly here. He's a horse who only tried turf for the second time. The first time was at Penn National in his 3-year-old season, a race that was just run over a complete bog. So I think you can put a line through that one. But I liked what I saw from Whitty last time. Now, he did get a pretty good pace set up that day, but he didn't get out of the gate great. And if the pace develops as we expect, I think he's going to be really dangerous in the lane.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, Craig. If there's a closer that seems like he's really going to appreciate this race setup, Whitty is the one that kind of jumps out at you. Agree with his last race, and people might forget this horse. It's kind of odd that he hasn't really spent much of his career on the turf because he is the younger half brother to Caravel, who is the dominant force in this division right now. And they tried him on the turf that one time over the boggy going in the Penn Mile, but he got back on it last time in that Laurel Dash. And he really did finish well in that race. I mean, hard to really gauge the pace just given the turf condition at Laurel that day, but it looked like he was getting over it pretty well, closing on 4 Harp at the end. And just given the way this pace sets up, seems like he's going to be very dangerous in this spot. The one concern I have with Whitty is that he's almost always slow out of the gate. So you're going to expect him to be last in the first few strides, but maybe that's not such a bad thing if the pace comes apart as it's expected to. Craig, if there's one horse that I think might be able to survive that expected hot pace, seems like it's pretty obviously going to be Nothing Better. He's just the classiest horse in this field, dropping out of the Jaipur last time. I actually liked him a little bit in that spot, and he managed to finish 5th. I didn't think it was a bad effort at all, especially given the way that race sort of fell apart behind Caravel at the end. He battled hard, did as well as he could. Cutting back to the 5.5 furlongs, it's not supposed to be a problem for him, and he has or at least run well from a stalking position on a couple of occasions in the past. So maybe Luis Saez decides to take back a little bit if a couple of the horses to his inside and outside are really intent on going. But if there's one horse that I could see surviving the pace, he'd be the one.
Yeah, I think he is probably the best. And I'm not totally dismissing 4 Harp either because he does draw outside and I could see him getting a tracking position. He's run okay a couple times from just off the pace. He wasn't able to win though, but he does get a better draw. It just kind of comes down to the odds. I'm glad we're going to get to see him before this race starts. So it's an interesting one for me. We haven't mentioned the 2 horse Midday Image, who's only 4-1 on the morning line. He has come from off the pace as well, but for me, he's just a little bit too slow compared to some others in here.
Yeah, I mean, he's coming out of that same Laurel Dash. I didn't think he had a big excuse that day. He was just sort of following 4 Harp around there and then got a bit tired at the end. He had run well in a couple of turf sprints when he was initially turned back by David Jacobson, but that was allowance company. He did beat a good field too back at Belmont. That was also a time when David Jacobson horses were running really well, though. So we'll see if he can be as effective here. Craig, I don't want to dismiss a horse like the number 4 Belgrano, who maybe looks like he's gone off form. He's a 9-year-old now, so he could be getting a little long in the tooth. But, I mean, this is a horse that has loved Monmouth Park in the past. I think the slight stretch out from 5 to 5.5 furlongs could be really key for this horse. And he got into good form over the winter, as recently as December, when he won the Janus Stakes over a good field, actually beating Nothing Better that day. His next 2 races weren't quite as good, but then he was off a layoff last time in the Get Serious, made a bit of a late move, not really threatening, but second off the layoff here. I wonder if he's just a little tighter for Frank Russo, a trader whose horses generally run well, but his barn can be a little underrated at times, picking up Javier Castellano. I think there are some things to like about Belgrano, about at what's going to be a bigger price. I think there's going to be more of a disparity between him and a horse like Whitty than what's depicted on the morning line.
I was going to say the same thing. I think he very well could wind up in the 8, maybe even 10-1 range when you look through this whole field. And I'm glad we'll get to see the odds because there's definitely some questions about his form, but I can see the case you're making that maybe he's rounding into it and coming up to a better race second off the layoff. So at a bigger price, I would use him on my tickets. If he was anywhere near the morning line, I wouldn't.
Yeah, I'll say I don't want 4 Harp in this race. He ran that huge figure last time in the Laurel Dash, leading the entire way. Just seemed like he really got over that turf course well at Laurel and, rated good, but it's got the 5 track condition rating in the TimeformUS PPs, indicating that was a course with quite a bit of give in it. And just seemed like maybe that was the right set of circumstances for him to achieve that career best figure on the turf. His other turf speed figures don't really justify him being as short as he is on the morning line, so I'd be kind of against him. And I guess the one other horse we could mention, Craig, is the number 1, Eamon, just because there's so much speed in this race, and he did make a big run from far back to win going 5 furlongs at Gulfstream last time. That was a race, though, that featured a lot of pace that came back to him. He's going to get a similar situation here, but I think he's going to have to do it against a better field.
Yeah, I agree. He really doesn't have the speed figures to match up. I mean, he's a 5-year-old. Maybe he's got a little more improvement in him. I'd be more interested in him getting a ground saving trip and maybe just clunking up in for tries or supers at what will be a pretty big price.
Let's move on to race 10, the second leg of this pick 4. It's the grade 3 Molly Pitcher. This one going 1.1 miles at over the dirt course for the fillies and mares. And I think we're going to have a pretty substantial favorite in here in last year's Molly Pitcher winner, the number 4 Search Results. Chad Brown basically taking the same path as last year. She ran a valiant race in defeat in the Ogden Phipps once again for the second year in a row, and he's just going to give her a slightly softer spot to get a graded stakes victory and hopefully her first win of the season in this Molly Pitcher. And Craig, if she holds her form, she's just going to be really tough for this field to handle.
She is. I agree. She's the horse to beat. It's not as easy as I thought it would be when I first looked at the entries. I do think there's some other horses who look pretty good, have run similar speed figures. The other Chad Brown, Distinctly Possible, is coming off a nice win at Monmouth in a listed stakes race, the Serena Song, where she ran a 119 speed figure. Leda Vida is a filly who we were talking about earlier in the year, or late last year when she came to the U.S., won her first 2 starts. Took her a while to get back to the winner's circle, but she had a nice win at Thistledown last time in a race that's proven pretty strong. A lot of horses have come to win out of that race, so I don't think that 119 speed figure she ran is any joke. And then what do you do with the 6-horse Loved, who has just been demolishing all takers this year, winning every race, 2 of them by double digits, the other by over 4 lengths, improving her speed figure up to a 117 last time. So for me, this race was a little more interesting than it was at first glance when I just assumed that Search Results would probably be 3 to 5.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that this is a tougher edition of the Molly Pitcher than they ran last year when Search Results was an easy winner. And, I'm gonna differ a little with the morning line maker here, Craig, and I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that the number 6 Loved is going to be a clear second choice in this race for a couple of reasons. I mean, there's really not much speed signed on, and she looks like the horse that's going to be controlling in front. Not that horses like Search Results and some others don't possess tactical speed, but Loved seems like she's the only one in the race that's a consistent front-running type, so I'd imagine they're going to go forward with her. And also, this is a horse that has been very visually impressive in her races. She's garnered a lot of buzz off those victories, and horses like that are winning geared down race after race, they tend to garner a bit of a fan base, and I think this horse is going to attract a lot of support coming into this race. I'm not going to be surprised if she's as low as 5-2 or 3-1 in here. So, that's a bit of a concern for me in terms of, picking Love in here, because she's a horse that, while she has run some speed figures that say she's not impossible in this spot, she's just been beating up on such inferior competition when you look through the horses that have finished behind her in those races at Churchill and Ells the last couple of times. I mean, they're not nearly in the same league as these horses. I mean, they wouldn't be competitive in most allowance races on top level circuits. So I'm a little concerned that she's just dressed up by beating bad horses, but there's no doubt that she's looked really good in those last few victories.
Yeah, what I'll say about those speed figures, I'm really not a fan of Loved in this spot. And the reason is when horses win by big margins easily as she has been doing, I want to see them come in with bigger speed figures in the field. Because like you said, she's been beating up on lesser competition. Sure, she could improve here, but I think the odds of that won't be enough to make up for whatever price she's going to be. It just, more often than not, these horses will regress a little bit when they step up in competition, which is why I would want to see her coming in with better speed figures in the field than what she shows here.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. You're kind of, betting her on the assumption that she's going to be able to run faster when she's really set down to a full-out drive, which hasn't happened in any of her starts so far this year. But that's tricky, Craig. I mean, sometimes these horses that win geared down, they can't always run that much faster than maybe you want to believe they can if their riders actually put them to the task. So I'm a little bit concerned about her, and she also has to race off Lasix for the first time in this race, which is just another layer to consider for a horse that I don't think is going to be anywhere near that 5-1 morning line. And Craig, just looking at some others in this field that could drift up in price, especially if Search Results and Love take all the money. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the form of Le Davida, who did get the victory last time in a race that came up surprisingly fast at Thistledown. But I mean, she's been knocking on the door. Her speed figures have been gradually heading in the right direction. When I watch her races, she's a horse that always gives me some cause for pause because she's not the prettiest mover. She almost always runs on her left lead and doesn't change over. But I mean, she just plugs away and is typically involved to the finish. And a repeat of that last performance certainly puts her in the mix here.
Yeah, I agree. She would be my second choice in this race, even over the other Chad Brown horse. I think that race was legit. If in the Timeform US PPs, you can see her couple starts before that in the Grade 2 Azari, the DuPont Distaff on Pimlico Preakness Day. Or maybe it was Black Eyed Susan Day. She was way against the pace there. The races had all the fractions in blue, and especially at Pimlico, she was still making up some ground late. Turned the tables on Interstate Daydream, the horse that beat her that day at Thistledown. So I think she's a legitimate contender in here and probably the main threat. And I also don't want to totally dismiss Distinctly Possible. She's a filly who has done all of her best running on dirt. She tried turf once, it didn't work out, went right back to the dirt, and has been steadily improving as a 4-year-old filly. And I also think she may be the one that's in closest attendance to Loved, getting that good tracking position.
Yeah, I mean, I have serious reservations about Distinctly Possible in this race. Just the legitimacy of that last performance. That was a very slow pace, especially for the first quarter, that she was sharing with the eventual second place finisher. It was also a day at Monmouth that seemed like it was a little speed favoring. So I feel like that race in the Serena Song is a little bit dressed up. It was just totally dominated forward. And in this race, I mean, she's probably going to get a similar trip stalking the pace, but it's just much, much better competition. And her prior races don't really make her a factor. Maybe she's heading in the right direction, and I guess it's a good sign that Chad Brown's even running here. But she's one that I'd be looking to take a little bit of a stand against. The one other horse that I'd be looking to use, Craig, is the number 7, First to Act. I know that her 2022 campaign ended on a disappointing note when she was no factor as the odds-on favorite in the Turn Back the Alarm. But before that, I mean, she had looked pretty good. That was a good second at Saratoga in the Summer Colony last year, behind leader of the band, and then she came back and was no match for Nest at the Beldame, but you can't really fault her for that. She actually ran on decently to be second that day, and she just felt like a horse for Shug that was heading in the right direction last year before something went awry at the end of her season. And now she's building back for a 5-year-old campaign, but seems like she's got a nice work tab coming in here. Seems like one that probably is going to get a little bit overlooked on the tote board, so I won't be surprised when she actually drifts up from that 6-1 morning line. And somewhere in there, she's got the ability to be very competitive with this field, so it's just a matter of whether or not she's ready off the layoff, and at the expected price, she's one that I'd be willing to use.
Yeah, I can see that. I got the feeling more that this was going to be a prep for something down the road, but she certainly had some races to be competitive in here.
Yeah, and for me, as I went through this race and spent more time on it, while I agree that it's a tougher field than the one that Search Results beat last year, I still view Search Results as way the horse to beat in this spot and the most likely winner, and I'll be keying her in this pick 4 sequence, using a little bit of Le Davida and probably to a greater extent First to Act as the backups in this race, probably Search Results an A, First to Act a B, and maybe Le Davida a C in here. But it's a race where I think some are going to be tempted to upgrade horses like Loved or use Distinctly Possible as the other Chad, but as I take apart Search Results 4, I mean, she has just consistently been very competitive against better fields than even this one. So to me, she is very much the most likely winner, and I'm not going to try to beat her with too much firepower in this race.
Yeah, we talked a lot about this race to really both kind of have that same conclusion. She would be the only A for me. I mean, she lost by half a length to Clairiere, who is probably the leader of the division. I know she's racing against Ness this weekend, and maybe that'll change, but Clairiere has just been so good, and search results nearly pulled it off last time and was game. So there's no knocks on that horse whatsoever.
Move on to race 11, the Grade 1 United Nations, going a mile and 3/8 on the turf course. And this is an interesting addition to the United Nations, Greg. We've got some horses that aren't necessarily proven over these marathon distances, some horses that have excelled going even longer than this, some stretch outs, and just generally, it's not the strongest grade one field that you're ever going to see, but I think that makes it an interesting race because it kind of opens it up some horses that are moving up in class. The favorite on the morning line, who seems like a legitimate favorite, is the number 9, Red Knight, who has competed against some tougher competition recently. He actually ran better than I thought he would last time in the Manhattan when he got up for 4th against a really tough field. He already has won a grade 1 this season in the Man of War. Just seems like he's in great form as a 9-year-old. I'm not against him in this race, but I will say he is a horse that has no early speed whatsoever, will be trying to launch from far back in the pack, and there's really no confirmed frontrunner in this field.
No, it is a race without a whole lot of speed. I mean, we show Catnip on the front. That's largely because he's been competing in shorter races with faster paces, some red fractions. But he's not really a front runner, so I don't know who's going to be on the lead in this case. It could be So High, the horse we have shown in second. He's similar, been running shorter and faster races. He actually has led at a mile on the turf at Aqueduct, so maybe it would be him. I don't know if either of those I consider really strong contenders. I mean, Catnip is 4-1 on the morning line, but he's stretching out a full 2 furlongs. I'm not sure if that's ideal. Has the speed figures, but it seems to have the breeding, but it just seems like a little short to me for a horse taking that big of a jump. So I'm in the same camp as you. I'm not totally against Red Knight. I want to use him on the ticket. But there's a couple others I want to use in here, and I'll start with one of his barn mates for Mike Maker, who always excels in these kind of races. But it's the longer price one that I'm interested in, and that's Yamato, the 7 horse. He's third off the claim for Mike Maker. We've seen time and time again how he kind of takes his time with these horses. After he claims them, kind of builds them up to run in these races. And he looks a little overmatched on paper, but I actually liked his run last time at Churchill in the Louisville. He was only beaten 2 lengths. He was really coming at the wire, and that was a race that really didn't feature any pace at all. So I don't know if I want to go as far as to say he's my top pick, but he's definitely a price horse that I want to use on my tickets.
Yeah, Craig. As you were talking about him, a thought popped into my head. And with Mike Maker having multiple horses in this race, 2 of which seem to have really no early speed, Therapist and Red Knight, I wonder if they're going to get way more aggressive with Yamato because he was so far back last time because he was a little slow out of the starting gate. But he's a horse who, while he's never been a front runner, he's at least sometimes been in a stalking position in some conventional route races. So going this marathon distance and with the rider switch to Luis Saez, I wouldn't be surprised if they decide to get a little more aggressive with this horse. And I imagine you probably wouldn't mind that if they did.
No, not at all. We've already talked about the lack of speed, and he's a horse who has shown he can finish his races. Even when he was in other barns, he could finish them off. And just, I trust Mike Maker going these distances. He's done it time and time again, and it's not always with the horses you expect. And that said, I don't want to totally toss Therapist. He's been fine in these races. He had that win in the Pan American when he was new in the barn. Not sure what happened in the Louisville. He really didn't do any running at all that day, but he bounced back pretty nicely at Ellis Park in the overnight stake that they ran. Quite run the same speed figure, but he draws a good inside position. It's not like he doesn't have any speed. He's shown pretty far back on the pace projector, but in this case, I think that's just because he's been running in such longer races. Well, I could see him laying mid-pack on the rail, saving ground and trying to get up late. So I'm going to use all 3 of the Mike Makers.
Yeah, I don't like Therapist. He'd be the Mike Maker horse that I can't use in this race, and maybe it's just some prejudice against this horse because I've never really viewed him as this kind of horse, and perhaps his mile-and-a-half victory in the Pan American three-back should make me revise that idea about him. But that Pan American was not a good race, and it just kind of fell apart at the very end. His two races since then, like you said, he ran poorly in the Louisville, and then I thought he really should have won that race at Ellis last time. He got a great trip and just couldn't quite get there. Stretching back out to the mile and 3/8, I just have some skepticism about Therapist in here. And as you were kind of alluding to, I think he's going to be a shorter price than Yamato, and I would much prefer Yamato between those two bigger priced Mike Maker horses. Craig, what do you do with a horse like the number 6 Planetario? You don't see Richard Mandela shipping east that often, and obviously this one probably came over on the plane with Go Rocket Ride, who we're going to talk about in a little bit in the Haskell. But still, I think it's significant that they would choose to bring this horse for this Grade 1 event, and he is one of the horses cutting back in distance, having gone longer last time in the San Juan Capistrano, and I know that was not the toughest field. That division in California just hasn't been the strongest, but this horse was visually impressive winning that race.
He was, but he's just not for me. I can't get past how weak those couple of fields he's been in last time. Awfully naughty being the main competitor. He turned the tables substantially, admittedly, turned the tables on him, but I just don't think those are good groups at all. And I would have a hard time imagining, even in this, what I would say one of your weaker grade ones, it just is a little bit too big of a jump for me. If you're betting him, it would be faith in Richard Mandela, which I totally get. I guess the big issue for me is he's actually the second choice on the morning line at 3-1, and I just don't see any value at all in him.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I have that same inclination as you to be against this horse, but in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, maybe this is just a horse, one of these South American horses that needed some time to acclimate and is now rounding into form. I mean, he didn't run well enough two back when he was second in the San Luis Rey, but that was off a long layoff, going a mile and a half. He had a right to need that race, and he was clearly a lot fitter last time. So maybe this is a horse that's just stepping in the right direction, and the fact that they've made this cross-country journey with him bolsters that notion. So he's not a horse I want to leave out in here. He's a horse that I think could take another step forward. So even though I generally want to be against ones like this, he's one that I would use in this spot. And another horse that I'm going to use, Craig, that is a bigger price on the morning line that I could easily make a case for is the number 8 Foreign Relations. This was actually the winner of the Louisville, and he got a good trip that day, stalking the pace, got the jump on some others, but I mean, he won by a length and a half. I thought that was a pretty decisive length and a half victory. He always looked like a winner of that race, and he's only gone these marathon distances around 3 turns a couple of times. One was when he was justifiably disqualified at Keeneland, but was an easy winner of that race. And then the Louisville, they cut him back to a mile and a quarter last time at Ellis, and it just seemed like he didn't have the quickness to pick up over the latter stages of that race. That was also a turf course that was rated firm, but probably just not really firm, looking at the fractions of that race and the track condition rating. So maybe he didn't like it that much, but he's a horse that I think is going to appreciate stretching back out around the 3 turns, and he's another one that I think can be much more forwardly placed than he was last time, looking at his prior 2 races, going the longer distances, and he might just be one of these lightly raced horses that still has upside, and a grade 1 like this that doesn't look like it's come up that strong could be ripe for the taking by a runner like him.
Yeah, I have no issue with him. Before we move on, I did want to mention Planetario, that 117 speed figure. I'm the speed figure maker. Kind of take that with a grain of salt. I'm not holding that against him too much because it's a mile and 3/4 race. It's not even a true speed figure. It's more of a class rating with him. So no matter how easily he won, it was going to be tough to run a speed figure with the other horses in behind him, not having very good credentials. Before we do move on, I kind of glossed over Catnip, and I was a little torn on him. I did want to get your thoughts on him. I mean, he's in great form. The real question is the mile and a half.
Yes, I think he's going to take money in this race, just off the graded stakes win at Monmouth last time, Joel Rosario riding, having compiled a win streak. He's the kind of horse that I'll let him beat me. I want to see him do it before I really believe in it. He's a half brother to Princess Grace, who was much more of a miler type for these same connections. So he is by Kitten's Joy. That gives him a little more stamina. At a short price, though, I'd much rather take others that have already proven their ability going these longer distances. And I will say, Craig, I mean, we spent a little time on him, but we kind of quickly moved on. I do think Red Knight is the horse to beat in this race, and between the two horses that are short prices on the line, Red Knight for me is an A in this race. I'm not against him. I mean, he's a horse that I think is hard to build a strong case against, aside from the pace being slightly unfavorable. But he's the most likely winner. I just think that it's a more open race than just defaulting to Red Knight. I wouldn't view it the same way from a multi-race sequence as I do the prior race in the Molly Pitcher, where I think search results is way the horse to beat, and I'm not that interested in alternatives. Here, I think Red Knight is the horse to beat, but there are bigger priced alternatives that I think will offer value.
Yeah, I think that's always a smart way to go with a horse like Red Knight because he just doesn't have that early speed and it's hard to win from back there. And you can see it in his record. He has plenty of wins, but he has plenty of races where he's not, he just doesn't get the job done when it looks like he might. He's going to be a little pace dependent. So I'm with you. I'm using him. He's an A horse. He has the best speed figures in the field. Catnip ran a similar one last time, but at a different distance. If you ignore Catnip, he would be like a full or quadruple race horse where he had better figures than anybody in the field has run.
Let's close out this pick 4 sequence with a discussion of the future race on the card, the Grade 1 Haskell going 1 1/8 miles for the 3-year-olds. Craig and I did a stakes preview of this race that you can check out on Daily Racing Form's YouTube channel, where we did an even deeper dive going through every single runner in the field if you want to find that. But Craig, let's discuss this race, among the main players. And I think we should probably start the discussion with the Kentucky Derby winner, Mage, who will be making his return, first start since a loss in the Preakness. And, I think Mage is kind of the key to this race, Craig, because if he runs back to that Kentucky Derby, he's probably going to win. The 126 TimeformUS speed figure just kind of towers over this field. I think few horses have even broken a 120. However, his surrounding numbers, they don't really make him a standout in this race. Yes, he had a trip in the Florida Derby. The pace of the Preakness, the race flow probably worked against him a little bit, but I think there's still a question about whether Mage is quite as good as that Derby winning speed figure.
Yeah, I think when the speed figure, when I first made it, it seemed a little high, but it's turned out to be pretty good in my opinion, given the run backs. Outside of me just running the Preakness, most of the horses in behind have run as good or better going forward, so I don't really have a problem with the number. I wound up picking Mage, as you know, on our preview. A lot of that has to do with the pace setup in this race. I think there's quite a bit of pace. I'm sure we're going to talk about some of the horses in it as we go through. But I'm expecting a big run from Mage. I guess the one concern would be his connections are kind of saying they're using this as a prep for the Travers. I generally don't pay a lot of attention to that stuff. I don't know what the difference is between a horse who's 90% and 100% cranked. I just have never put much stock in that. And I think the rest probably did Mage some good. I think that's the biggest excuse that he has more than anything is he was a very lately rushed horse or lately raced horse who I don't want to say was rushed into the Derby, but this horse didn't debut till January 28th. The Derby was his 4th race, and I think by Preakness time, he just went a little flat, and he's been working fine since. I think the rest is going to do him some good, and I expect him to run very well in here.
Yeah, I agree. His Preakness was a little flat. He had an excuse with that race holding together on the front end, but you still would have wanted to see him make more of a dent on a horse like Blazing Sevens at the end of that race, and even National Treasure, the winner. I certainly would not like either of them in this spot. So I was hoping to see a little better from Mage that day. Maybe he's going to bounce back, having got that freshening now. But Craig, I do still have that lingering worry with him that prior to the Preakness, where he actually broke fine from the gate, in his 3 prior starts, he had broken slowly in each one of them. So is he going to suddenly overcome that now, or is he a horse that will revert to that tendency to be a little slow out of the gate? Maybe won't matter so much in this Haskell because it's a smaller field, and also because there is some speed signed on in this race. I mean, the pace projector is predicting a fast pace. We'll see if that plays out, but what I do know is that they're probably going to be intent on getting to the front with the horse drawn in the outside gate, the number 8, Arabian Night, who actually was pegged as the morning line favorite in this race, and I really can't argue with that because Bob Baffert has been so dangerous in the Haskell. I think all of the bettors know that at this point, that he targets this race with his best 3-year-olds, and Arabian Night has been working well for his return from the layoff, but Craig, it's still a tall order for a horse that has only run twice in his career to come back off this nearly 6-month layoff against the best 3-year-olds in the land.
It's a very tall order, and particularly when you look at the field and some of the other horses in here, there's some other fast horses. If this was a race where the pace projector showed him alone on the front end, you know, maybe I'd like him a little more, but I just think it's going to be very tough. I did a formulator stat for our race preview, and it wasn't a big sample size, admittedly, but there were several low priced losers in there. Bob Baffert hasn't won with a 3-year-old male off of this kind of layoff when he moves into graded stakes company. I think it was 0 for 8. Authentic wasn't able to do it. There were a couple others that were very short prices, like 2 to 5 and 1 to 2, who didn't get the job done. And arguably, they were in easier circumstances than what Arabian Night is. So, and a horse who I think is going to be the favorite, even over the Kentucky Derby winner, I just am not that interested in him.
Yeah, I mean, if anybody can get a horse ready off workout, it's Bob Baffert, because nobody works their horses harder in the morning than he does, and this horse looks fit. However, it's still a little unorthodox to not get a prep race in, and I think it just speaks to the fact that, you know, they probably ran out of time to get in a prep race with this horse and targeting this one. And I also, he's a horse that's been a little fragile, Craig. I mean, they've only been able to run him twice. He obviously has a ton of speed, a ton of ability, but he's a very expensive horse. He's the kind of horse that could have a lucrative stud deal one day, and I wonder if they know this guy only has so many starts in him and they didn't want to risk a prep race before running here. So we'll see how that works out. I have reservations. I think he's dangerous in here, but at the expected price, I'd be willing to look elsewhere. You know, Craig, among the horses that I think have a lot to prove, moving up in class or being lightly raced, I kind of prefer Extra Anejo at what's going to be a better price. I mean, this horse has run even a little faster than Arabian Night, at least on the TimeformUS speed figures, and he hasn't faced as strong company, I guess you could say, in his victories, though he was beaten by a good horse in Federal Judge 2 back, but he was really impressive at Ellis last time. That was a fast-paced race where he seemed to have no problem just letting a leader run off in the early stages, so I think that bodes well for him maybe sitting off Arabian Night this time, and he's got plenty of pedigree, especially on the dam side, to say that 1.125 is going to be no problem for him.
I agree. I was really impressed with that race at Ellis Park where he just kind of let that runoff horse go. And that horse actually has come back to win since. He did collapse that day and didn't do much, but he just set a ridiculously fast pace. And it's not like Extra Anejo when you look in Timeform US was going slowly when 4 lengths off. I mean, he ran some very fast pace figures, cruised by and was able to just win as easy as could be. Ran a nice speed figure. He's going to be third off the layoff, so I've got no knocks with him. I guess the big concern is that Arabian Night is to his outside, is probably going to be content to make the lead. So I would assume that the ride would be to just kind of let him go and track back in second or maybe even third with Go Rocket Ride, who I'm sure we'll get to, but there's nothing not to like about this horse. I given him an excuse for his return. Don't think he was probably fully cranked for that when he was a little slow out of the gate, but I got the impression he was more a sprint type, but not after seeing his last race. And granted, this will be his first try around 2 turns. Ellis Park is that weird 1 mile, kind of a turn and a half configuration, similar to the Wilson Chute at Saratoga, but I saw nothing that made me think he couldn't get 2 turns.
Yeah, I was kind of torn between two horses in this Haskell. One of those was Extra Anejo, who I already made the case for, and the other one, who the horse I actually put on top in this race, is the number 5 Tap It Trice. And looking at the morning line, Craig, and kind of making my own line in my head about how I think they're going to bet this race, I kind of see Extra Anejo and Tap It Trice being very similar prices. I don't really think Tap It Trice is going to be a much shorter price or even the same price as Mage in this race. He just seems like a horse that has had some people abandon the ship or jump off the bandwagon after, having disappointed a few times. But Tap It Trice might get a better setup in this race than he's gotten in a few of his recent starts. The Bluegrass, it probably wasn't the toughest field in the world. I mean, we've seen what verifying is since then, and he's just okay. But Tap It Trice still ran well to win that race, making that early move during the race. The Derby, I never thought the Derby was going to be the right race for him. He didn't handle the situation well as expected, but I thought he bounced back pretty nicely in the Belmont last time, and I kind of didn't realize how well he ran initially when I watched the race, but going back to take in the replay, I mean, Louis Sai has asked a lot of this horse, kind of like they always do. I mean, to make an early move, into the far turn with about 5 furlongs to go. He was pumping on this horse, raced 5 wide all the way around the far turn, losing significant ground. I thought he actually ran a better race than Forte, who I know some people were griping about the trip, but I thought Forte got a much better trip than Tap It Trice in that Belmont Stakes, and he was still fighting on at the end to try to hold that horse off for a second. This horse has the ability to win a race like the Haskell. It's just a matter of putting all the pieces together and getting the right kind of ride and trip. If they move a legitimate pace up front, I think he's going to be able to work his way into the race a little more gradually. Part of it's going to depend on how the Monmouth track plays on Saturday. Generally at Monmouth can be a little bit favoring towards, horses making those outside moves. The rail's dead sometimes. However, on the big days, they can soup up the track, make it faster. Sometimes it could be more speed favoring. So we'll want to, pay attention to the early races to see how it's playing on Saturday's card. But I just think Tap It Trice fits this race pretty well. And he might not be as short a price as he's been in some of those recent starts.
My one concern with Tap It Trice is the fast pace, and that might seem a little bit counterintuitive to what you would think for a horse with his style. But he just seems like a horse to me you have to work so hard on to keep in the race that when the pace gets fast, kind of like it did in the Kentucky Derby, I'm afraid he might get lost against some of these horses. And it is a turn back. So I'm a little more negative than Tap It Trice than you are. I did think he ran well at the Belmont, but that was the race he was supposed to run well. It's a mile and a half, the race everybody seemed to think that it would be his for the taking and would just hit him right between the eyes, and he didn't deliver. He did have a tough trip, I agree, and nobody was rooting for him to get second harder than I was that day because I didn't have Forte. But he wasn't able to do it, so I just take a little different view that I suspect he's going to struggle at this mile and an eighth distance.
And Craig, we didn't even mention another horse that you're interested in, the number 3, Salute the Stars. He won the local prep for this in the Pegasus, and I'll let you talk about that race. It was a impressive performance, more so than the neck victory might lead you to believe. It's a big step up in class, though.
It is, but I really liked how he did it. When you see in our video preview, we show the stretch run, and we first cut to at the top of the stretch, and they highlight this horse, and it doesn't look like there's any way he's getting up to win the race, but he does, and he does it over King's Barnes, who was a pretty decent horse. He's on the shelf now, but I thought it was a pretty quick race. He had a lot of trouble at the start of this race. He was very ranked, kind of fighting the rider. I'm hoping for a little more professionalism, but the one thing I'm sure of is he's going to be a price in here. He's 8-1 on the morning line with the others we've already talked about. I'd be surprised if he's that low. I would expect double digits even. And other than Mage, his speed figures are right there with everybody else, and I think he's going to get a very good setup in here.
Yeah, I mean, my one reservation with him was that June 18th, or June 17th rather, the Pegasus Day at Monmouth was one of those days where it felt like outside paths were really preferred. So maybe his wide trip wasn't quite as bad as it looked at first glance, just given the way the track was playing. But still, he had to overcome a lot to win that race. But Craig, the horse that we haven't mentioned that, is a short price on the line is the number 1, Go Rocket Ride. I kind of had trouble building a case for him stretching out in distance again. I'm not sure that he's really more than just a miler type, but maybe that's splitting hairs too much because I could see a scenario where Go Rocket Ride is kind of the forgotten horse on the board and drifts up to 7-1. And maybe he's not supposed to be that high of a price, but it's still a tall order for him because he wasn't beating much last time at Santa Anita.
No, I guess the upside for Go Rocket Ride would be that it's very easy to envision him getting a perfect pocket trip in behind Extra Anejo and Arabian Night. If those two are the two pace setters in either order, maybe Extra Anejo tips out and sits to the outside of Arabian Night. But in any case, I can see a trip where Go Rocket Ride just stays on the rail, sits about 2 lengths off of him, and just he's either good enough or he's not. But he's going to get his chance in the stretch. It's hard to envision him, for me, getting a tough trip unless they tried to engage for the lead. But nothing in his PP says he will. He has good speed figures, so I don't want to totally dismiss Go Rocket Ride. He's a good horse who, in my mind, figures to get a good trip.
Well, Craig, that wraps up our handicapping of this pick four sequence. Let's do our usual recap and look back at some of the races that we just discussed and how we might structure this ticket. I'll let you begin.
Yeah, in the Wolf Hill, I like Whitty. I'm glad to hear that he is going to go in this spot. And there's plenty of speed in here. I think he's going to run better on the turf. Second time, I'm ignoring that race at Penn, but second time turf sprinting and should get a good setup. But I don't want to totally dismiss the speed horses either. Nothing better. And even for Harp, I know you're a little against him, but I think he could get a good trip from the outside post. But you want to be too careful of just dismissing speed horses in these turf sprints because of a lot of other speed, because oftentimes the speed of the speed will win. And I'm not totally against Belgrano, another horse who you mentioned as well, who could get that similar setup to Whitty. In the 10th, I would lean on search results, but I would use as backups Leda Vida and Distinctly Possible, the other Chad Brown horse. Race 11, kind of similar. I'm not against Red Knight. I will definitely use them on my tickets, but I'm going to use the other Mike Makers and Therapist, and especially Yamato, who I might use as a co-A with Red Knight. I like the idea that you said that they might even be aggressive with him, with Luis Saez taking them out. And I just like this third time off the claim, going the 11 furlongs for Mike Maker, and this horse should offer some value. In the Haskell, I made Mage my top pick, but I would use some others in here. I would use Extra Neho, especially Salute the Stars. I think he's going to be a price, and I would use Go Rocket Ride as a backup. I'm not going to use Arabian Night. If he beats me, he beats me, but I think he's going to be overbet, and I already have quite a few favorites on the ticket.
Yeah, for me, I mean, we have some agreement, some structural differences, I think, Craig. I mean, in the first leg, I'm primarily just going to use three horses, and I'll probably just make it three A's, and those would be Belgrano, Whitty, and Nothing Better. To me, they're just the horses that either have the ability or going to get the setup, and I'm kind of a little bit against everybody else. I think they've got some things to prove, and they're just not going to be the right prices for me. In the 10th race, the Molly Pitcher, I kind of already outlined this one. Search results will be my A, the only A that I use in this race. I'd use First to Act as a B and probably Lay Davida as a B or C. I'd see how much this comes out to, but I wouldn't really want to go deeper than those three, and I'll just let Loved beat me at the price that I think she's going to be in that spot. In the United Nations, I mostly want to use four horses, and I'll probably split them among A's and B's. The two that I probably would lean towards making the A's are Red Knight, who I'm not against, but also Foreign Relations, who I think is going to be the right price, had an excuse last time. And the two B's, I would lean towards Planetario and Yamato, the horse that Craig likes. If this ticket is looking like it's coming up a little cheaper, maybe I would upgrade one of those. But I mostly want to go through this race with those four horses and let some others beat me. Horses like Therapist and Catnip I don't need on my ticket. And then in the Haskell, the two horses that I want the most, that'll both be A's for me, are Tapit Trice and Extra Anejo. I think that they're two of the more likely winners of this race, and they're not going to be the favorites. I would use some backups in this race. I would use Arabian Night if I'm right in the other legs. The more I look at it and talk about it, I could even use Go Rocket Ride as a B or C, just because I don't necessarily like him in this race, but it just feels like a horse that a lot of people might not like, and maybe he's going to be the right price, and he isn't untalented, so I could use him a little bit, and Mage is the one that I'm kind of on the fence about. I'm tempted to just go against him in here because he's going to take money, and I have some reservations, but I could probably throw him on my tickets as a C. And that takes us to the end of this pick 4 sequence, Craig. And for a pick 4, I think this is a very playable one. I mean, it's good. All these races, there are multiple horses to consider. Maybe if we had another really complicated race, this would have been a difficult pick 5 to put together. But after we talk about it, I actually kind of like the sequence, and it's one I'll probably play.
Yeah, and I like that you pointed out that it is a lower takeout pick 4, unlike some others that we see. Makes it a better betting proposition than it otherwise would have been. It's something we don't always talk about on these. We mostly do pick 5s, which have reasonable takeouts. Pick 4s don't always, but this one does. So I think that's a very good thing, and I'm glad you mentioned it.
Well, we'll, of course, recap these races next week, most of them likely when we do the TimeformUS Pacecast, including those 2 Grade 1s of the Haskell. I'm looking forward to see how it plays out, Craig, because there's a lot still to be settled in this race to become 3-year-old champion. This race and the Jim Dandy traditionally serve as preps for the Travers, but the Haskell matters a lot in regard to year-end honors, and I'll be interested to see how these 3-year-olds sort themselves out, because there's clearly a lot of talent in this crop, but a few of them are just short on accomplishments up until now. So I'll definitely be looking to take in this race on Saturday and recap it with you next week.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's kind of a weird year in that I don't think there's any real standout. If I had to pick the leader, I guess I would say Forte. I could get some others arguing for others, particularly Mage, but to me, it's basically wide open in the races starting here, because even some of the horses that haven't won any of the big races could easily overtake those, because there's not a big lead at the top of the division.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, that wraps up our handicapping for this week. Remember, you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Wherever you get your podcasts, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Again, everybody, thanks for tuning in, and make sure to catch that TimeformUS Pacecast coming up next week.